The Apollo 4 mission marked the first operational use of Launch Complex 39, as well as the first launch of the Apollo Saturn V vehicle, which will someday carry 3 Americans to the moon. The 3 vehicle stages underwent extensive checkout inside the vehicle assembly building prior to being erected on a mobile launcher in High Bay Number 1. Apollo 4 was the first flight version Saturn V to be erected in the building. Prior to assembly, the Apollo spacecraft provided by the Manned Spacecraft Center underwent extensive automated checkout and tests in Kennedy's Manned Spacecraft Operations Building. The computerized equipment in Firing Room 1 of the Control Center was used to check out and launch Apollo 4. Government and contractor technicians operated the 218 individual consoles and 238 racks of equipment. At the completion of the VAB checkout, the launch escape system was installed on top of the Apollo spacecraft to complete the configuration. In the early hours of August 26th, the Apollo Saturn V began its journey to the launch site some 3 miles away. The Apollo 4 mission included several significant milestones in the program to land men on the moon and return them safely to Earth. The mission would require the first use of the launch facilities, the first flight of an integrated all-systems-up Apollo Saturn space vehicle, the first flight of the booster and the second stage of the Saturn V, the first restart in space of the third stage, and the first demonstration of Apollo spacecraft performance entering the Earth's atmosphere at speeds greater than those previously encountered by spacecraft returning from orbital tests. Circular platforms on this structure provide access to the spacecraft for final checkout and servicing. Several problems were uncovered and corrected during the demonstration count, which required almost 2 weeks to complete. A flight readiness test next included a tie-in with the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, from where the Apollo 4 flight was controlled. When pad testing was completed, a launch date for Apollo 4 was set for November 7th. A 6-hour launch window opened at approximately 7 a.m. for an extended number of days. However, minor operational problems delayed the start of the 49-hour terminal countdown until November 6th. Once begun, the countdown progressed smoothly. And on the afternoon of November 8th, the transporter moved the mobile service structure from the pad to its parking area. The service arms, which carry fuel, power, and communications lines to the Apollo Saturn, remained attached to the vehicle until liftoff. The third stage, after completing 2 orbits, was to ignite a second time to place Apollo into an elliptical orbit with an apogee of 11,400 miles. The second stage was scheduled to burn for 6 1/10 minutes to produce 1 million pounds of thrust. Behind the louvered windows of the Launch Control Center, the Kennedy Space Center launch team manned the consoles, recorders, and equipment. The ever-changing display of information confirmed that the countdown was proceeding as planned. As night approached, propellant loading began. Over 1 million gallons of propellant, including 450,000 gallons of liquid oxygen and 300,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen, were pumped into the 3 stages of the Saturn V. Throughout the night, the countdown continued without any major holds. On November 9th, 1967, traffic streamed into the Space Center as government and industry officials, Space Center personnel, and the world press, radio, and TV gathered to witness the historic launch. As the countdown approached 0, precisely on schedule at 7 a.m., it demonstrated the superb cooperation and effective teamwork of the government-industry organization which made this moment possible. cameras on board the launch vehicle recorded first stage separation, which occurred at T plus 2½ minutes. The separation was clearly visible to the thousands who watched the huge rocket climb into space. Shortly after second stage ignition, the spacecraft's launch escape system was cast off. Then, a smooth jettison of the adapter skirt took place. After a second stage burn in excess of 6 minutes, the spacecraft was at an altitude of more than 100 miles. The third stage then inserted the remaining 140 tons, the heaviest payload ever launched, into a 118-mile-high parking orbit. After separating from the third stage, the spacecraft's propulsion system was fired to raise the apogee to 11,232 miles. 8 hours and 36 minutes after liftoff from the Kennedy Space Center, the Apollo spacecraft landed in the Pacific Ocean within sight of its recovery ship, the aircraft carrier Bennington. Accelerated by a second burn of the service module engine, the spacecraft successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at more than 25,000 miles per hour to test the Apollo heat shield at temperatures over 5,000 degrees. With all objectives met, Apollo 4, the first flight of America's lunar rocket, was an unqualified success. The mission was an event unequaled in the history of the nation's space program.